Let's talk to Nigel Huddleston and find out what on earth is going on. Nigel, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Congratulations on your new role, co-chairman of the Conservative Party. Were you expecting that?
Well, thank you very much. Well, it's a job that I'm embracing because I was very keen to do it. I was a vice chair in the past, and this is one of the roles that, to be honest, I'd coveted. So I'm very, very pleased indeed to be the co-chair.
And so I imagine Kemi Badenoch is going to go through the next few days sort of appointing different people. She's brought Priti Patel back in. She's got Robert Jenrick working in Shadow Justice. So, I mean, she's hit the ground running, has she?
Well, I believe she has. Interestingly, we've got Shadow Cabinet in about an hour's time. There's been a lot of speculation about who will be in the Shadow Cabinet team, and to be honest, I don't know exactly who is in there at the moment. There's only been a few formal appointments. Right. You're also right to point out, though, it goes beyond the Shadow Cabinet team. There's a whole host of more junior ministerial roles that will take a couple of days. But what Kemi's doing, she's embracing the full talent in the party. She's bringing in people from the left and the right. She's offering roles to her opponents because one of the key things she wanted to do and recognises that we need to do is unite the party, and we need to start here in Parliament doing that.
So are you going to turn up for this Shadow Cabinet meeting without knowing who's actually going to be in the room?
I am indeed, yes.
Wow.
So it's exciting for me as well.
It is exciting. Who would you like?
I mean, because these appointments are being made quick and fast.
Yeah, they are being made.
There's a lot of talent.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent in the party. There's and also, as I said, don't forget the junior roles, because we've got 28 new MPs as well, and I'd like to see some of those take front bench roles, because they're incredibly talented. I mean, if you look at some of the maiden speeches, they are amazing people who bring in a wealth of experience as well. Well,
given that that's the situation, I mean, what's the first point of order, if you like, in your Shadow Cabinet business? Because you have to be deciding precisely, presumably, what strategy you're going to adopt. I mean, Kemi Badenoch said on the one hand that she wanted to, you know, properly investigate what went wrong, but at the same time she didn't want to do it particularly on TV at the weekend. Is that going to be your first kind of point of call, or are you going to try and come out fighting on university fees? Are you going to try and come out fighting on immigration or on the budget?
Well, look, I think you've already seen us come out fighting on things like the budget and some of the issues you've just been talking about on the show this morning. Look, the priority is to unite the party. Then we need to renew the party, and that means structurally, but also in terms of policy development. And Kemi took a different approach than some of the other candidates. She said, look, we need to focus on what unites us as Conservatives, what are our underlying core principles, and then develop the policies from that. But at the same time, there is clear blue water emerging between us, the Conservatives, and Labour. And that is based as well on Kemi's philosophy, you know, supporting business, smaller government, lower taxes, personal responsibilities. These are all things that this Labour government is throwing out the window. And we also need to take our responsibilities as His Majesty's official opposition to hold this government to account, because it's been a shambles. And if you identified this morning, they said one thing in opposition and are doing a completely different thing in government in nearly every policy area so far, the latest being university tuition fees. But last week's budget, they said that they wouldn't increase taxes, that they said that they wouldn't fiddle the books, they said that all their spending commitments were fully funded. Absolute nonsense. It's been the complete opposite. We will hold them to account for the decisions that they are now making based on Conservative principles versus Labour principles. And the way that they have thrown the private sector under the bus is just a best example of that.
And what about the Conservative principles that you're going to be upholding? Because one of the reasons why the Conservative Party kind of lost its way, I think, is because they forgot what their principles were. What are they now?
I think that's a fair comment, and Kemi has been refreshingly honest about that in recognising why we lost the general election, because, as she said many times, we talked right but governed left. We allowed the state to get so big. We allowed immigration to get beyond what the British public and indeed our services could tolerate. So we need to make sure we're straight and honest with the British public and go back to those underlying principles that do unite us as Conservatives, because we lost our way a little bit. Now, some of it was as a result of consequences. Let's not forget, we spent £400 billion on the pandemic out of necessity. That was supported by the British public largely, as supported by the opposition. But that money needs paying back. But what we've ended up with was a state that's much, much bigger than it needs to be. specifics include things like the goal to reduce the size of the civil service, to make sure that we focus on efficiency in government services. The private sector have improved efficiency and productivity. The public sector hasn't. These are underlying Conservative principles. We recognise we need to grow the private sector, make sure that that is the dynamic part of the economy that generates the taxes, that pays for our valuable and important public services, but it's the private sector that needs support. And as I said, last week's budget, classic example, same old Labour, completely, ruining whole sections of the private sector and enlarging the public sector. That is a big difference between us and Labour, and you will see more of this coming out over the coming weeks, months and years.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Because by the time you get back in, if you get back in, the public sector will be even bigger than it is now.
And that's why we're incredibly motivated. You will see a shadow team that is coming out fighting, because we're really angry about this. It is absolutely. Our private sector, our entrepreneurial spirit, we've got leading-edge industries, our creative industries, our leading-edge tech sector. All of these areas deserve support, and instead they've been whacked with taxes, they've been undermined. And again, all of these things were things that Labour said they would not do. So they're not only under attack, they didn't believe that they would be under attack because Labour misrepresented themselves before the election. So we need to hold them to account in a really robust way. You're right, as you alluded to earlier, we're relatively small in numbers, but we will be a very effective fighting force in Parliament because we're angry here. We're angry on behalf of our constituents. And we need to make sure that people understand that they've got an alternative route to go down, an alternative government in the making, and we need to present ourselves as such so that people can feel comfortable and confident voting for the Conservative Party again. We lost way too many votes to other parties, but we're the ones who can form the next government. We're the ones who needs to be the depository of those votes from people who also do not like the approach that the Labour Party are taking. That's the only way we can get back into government. So we'll be fighting for every single vote, but it'll be principles-based, and we will have a robust policy stance come the next election that I think will attract people.
And what do you hear from your local members? Because there was a very small turnout for the leadership election at the end of the day. I think it was only just over 50%. So a lot of people had sort of walked away and just didn't want to bother and didn't want to know. A lot of people think that Kemi Badenoch is an interim leader, that she won't actually be a Prime Minister. What do you say to that?
No, Kemi's in this for the long term. She's made that commitment. She wants to be there, not only be the leader of the opposition, but she wants to be Prime Minister, because in opposition, people don't really care so much about what we say because, we're not in government. We need to be in government in order to implement the things that we say. The turnout, actually, I think was 73%, nearly 73% of members, which is pretty high. That's 10% above what it was in the general election. So our members actually did turn out and vote, and Kemi got about 56% of the vote. So my members are highly motivated. The interesting thing as well is, even though my members, for example, voted for some other members, obviously Rob, but many supporters of other leadership candidates, the one message I've got now is that they're all united behind Kemi. We need to back Kemi. She needs to bring in the talent from across the party, and we need to unite, because that division and those internal arguments was one of the reasons why we lost the last election. The British public do not like disunited parties, and that's one of the lessons that we need to learn. And I say we need to learn in opposition. We need to use the time wisely and make sure that we can come up with a policy stance and proposition that is attractive to the British population. It's not good enough just to be angry about this government. We also need to make sure that we've got a positive alternative that people want to vote for.
So are you confident that all the people in the shadow cabinet will be of one mind then and one opinion?
Well, we absolutely will be united. We'll be backing Kemi. And also, as I said, given the way that we'll develop policies based on underlying Conservative principles, these will be things that we can unite around. There'll be certain policy areas, often areas where we have free votes, for example, where there will be differences and disagreements. But what we'll find as well is that those will be respectful disagreements. But we also need to make sure that we sign up to one voice, one policy, and back Kemi as leader. And so far, that is exactly what I've heard.
And what about reform? What's your view of reform?
Well, the thing with reform is we've lost many friends to reform. We've got people who buy into, understand and support the same values as we have as Conservatives, in particular that personal responsibility, low tax, small government, supporting private sector, all those things that Kemi has talked about during the leadership election campaign, people felt like we weren't doing that they didn't see the Conservatives advocating on their behalf over the last couple of years, and therefore felt that they could be comfortable voting reform. Now, one thing that we saw loud and clear is vote reform, get Labour. We saw that in so many seats across the country. We saw it when Andy Street lost in the West Midlands election. So we want many people who voted for reform to come home, come back to the Conservative Party, because we are the ones who represent their values and, most importantly, could be in a position to then implement their policies and their values in government, whether it's local government or in central government. So my appeal to reform voters is, we heard you, we understand your anger, but please come home to the Conservatives, because we're there, we've got your backs, and we can implement the things that you want and get this frustrating Labour government out. Nobody else can do that.
Dawn Butler is still a member of the Labour Party, hasn't been suspended by Keir Starmer, despite what she said, what she retweeted, I should say, about Kemi Badenoch, which is a pretty disgraceful thing to say. Will you be trying to get Keir Starmer to move on that?
Well, look, decisions on whipping are very much for the individual parties. But yes, indeed, I think her comments have caused offence and were inappropriate, and she needs to answer for that. It's up to the Labour Party whether to remove the whip or not, and people will judge them on their actions and behaviour on this and in other issues.
But doesn't it seem like he's rather inconsistent? I mean, he suspended Diane Abbott, he suspended Rupert Hook, and when he was in opposition, now he's in government, he doesn't suspend Dawn Butler.
I think you're making a valid point, but inconsistency with Keir Starmer is not a surprise to me. As I said, again and again, we're seeing this. This is a recurring pattern, isn't it? We're seeing it in the behaviour and his stance when it comes to internal party management, and we're seeing it in policy areas. He doesn't seem to care about keeping the promises and having a consistent stance. They say one thing and do another. We've seen it with the budget, we've seen it with tuition fees, and we've seen it with inconsistent treatment of his own MPs. But these are things that he needs to be accountable for and that he needs to answer to. And people are making judgments about that inconsistency in his behaviour, and I'm not surprised. And I think they're making judgments that are correct, that he isn't somebody that we can trust.
Will you be cheering for Donald Trump tonight to win?
Look, we will work with whoever wins.
Oh, you don't have to give me that. You don't have to work with them.
So that they both.
You don't have to work for them with them. You won't be in for 4 years. So just tell us who you want to win.
The opposition, and remember we are His Majesty's official opposition, we often do actually have relationships with the US election. Look, one thing I can say is Kemi said that both candidates have got positive attributes, and Kemi's got a track record of working with Democrats and Republicans, because I work with her at the Department for Business and Trade, for example, doing trade deals and MOUs with individual states, including both Democrats and Republicans. And I think it's important. We've got to be careful about not making comments about a domestic. We need to respect the process going on in the States. And I think you've heard that from a lot of Conservatives. Contrast that again with, for example, our current Foreign Secretary, who seems to be missing a diplomacy chip, who I think called Donald Trump a Ku Klux Klan sympathiser, a neo-Nazi sympathiser.
Yeah, but that was when he wasn't working. That was when he wasn't working with him, though.
Sociopath.
But that was when he wasn't working with him. He was in opposition.
The current Foreign Secretary. Yeah, but even in opposition, you need to respect people who could be in very senior roles. And if you aspire to be Foreign Secretary, one of the requirements surely must be, you know, a diplomacy chip. And I think this is symptomatic of this Labour government. You know, we've got a Foreign Secretary missing a diplomacy chip. We've got a Home Secretary who thinks her job is to release criminals rather than have them behind bars. And we've got a Chancellor of the Exchequer who can't count, and then a Prime Minister who's all over the place. I mean, this is a shambles of a government, and we've seen that in every single area, but in particular when it comes to any comments about the potential leader of the free world, you would expect our chief diplomat to be somewhat diplomatic in his comments, and he isn't.
No, he's not. But I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about you. You've got a new beginning. You're talking about the principles of the Conservative Party. Who do you think is going to be a better leader of the free world for Britain? Would it be Trump or would it be Kamala Harris?
Well, as I said, the reason why I made those comments is that, unlike our Foreign Secretary, I have a diplomacy chip, and also it is important that we do not make derogatory comments about a potential election going on live in the US at this very moment.
I'm not asking you to make a derogatory comment, Nigel. I'm just saying, who do you think would be best for Britain? That doesn't involve derogatory comments.
We will work with whoever wins.
That's not an answer.
No, we've got to be respectful. I think the point I'm making...
I'm asking you a very straight question, Nigel.
And I'm telling you that what's important is we need to respect processes going on in democratic countries, and it's for the Americans to decide who their president is, and we will work with whoever they decide. And by the way, I know you're not, but I'm not giving you the answer because it's inappropriate for me to give the answer that you're looking for there. In the same way, by the way, that I would expect you know, other countries not to make derogatory comments about our leadership. We've got to respect international processes, and I respect the decisions made by the American people in the same way that I would expect them to do that.
Nigel, I'm not asking you to make a derogatory comment. I'm just asking you, who do you think would be better for Britain? That's not asking you to make a derogatory comment. You can make a choice there without being derogatory about anybody.
Well, as I said, we have worked with both Democrats and Republicans and will continue to do so. I believe that the US relationship is vitally important, and we will continue to work very, very well with whoever wins, because different styles and different policies will come out of the US, but we've got a really special relationship with them, and that will continue to be the case. And we will work as the opposition with whoever wins the US election.
Yeah,
and as I say, I understand what you're trying to get at there, but I think it's, yeah.
I mean, you're a politician. You should have an opinion.
My opinion is it's really important. Yeah, I also need a diplomatic chip, because you're not just politicians to mouth off. You're also people who are there as ambassadors of the country you represent, whether in government and opposition. And it would be completely inappropriate on an election day for me to make a comment about preferring one side or another in a democratic election process that is taking place at this very moment in time. And if somebody else did that in the States, the UK, I would be offended.
Would you?
And I don't think it's appropriate.
Maybe you're in the wrong job. Maybe you've got a cabinet full of talented people.
Work with whoever.
You've got a cabinet full of talented people. Maybe you can find someone that can answer a question.
Well, you know, as I said, we're having a respectful disagreement here. The question you're asking is not one that I think I should answer on a day of a US election and perfectly fair and reasonable democratic process going on.
OK.
So I'll respectfully disagree with you on that.
Nigel Huddleston, thank you very much indeed, co-chairman of the Conservative Party. They've now got a new beginning, and they've got new principles, and they've got a lot of talented people, but they don't want to answer a question about who should win the US presidential race, even though it wouldn't matter because they're in opposition. Astonishing, isn't it?